Welcome back. Let's move on to some news from the world of sports now. The NBA League in basketball is undoubtedly one of the most popular sporting events in the United States and European countries as well. The association, which is now in the nation, has spotted great talent for the game in India and has been training players for next month's Asian Games. Our sports reporter Sudarshan took a dribble at the courts and scooped out how the trainers see the future of the sport in India.
Indian basketball teams are training in Chennai for the Asian Games in China next month. These players are lucky as they are guided by the world's finest coaches drafted straight from the NBA. The players say it's an entirely new experience.
It's too much. Actually, he's a defensive coach. And we are not playing defense like all other teams from outside of India or Europe and something. It's a word and from some coaches that offense win the match and defense win the championship.
Basketball is not popular in India, but these coaches have forecast a great future for the game in the country. It just needs one role model like China's Yao Ming, who changed the phase of the game in China. NBA coach Bill Harris says Indian players just need to know the right way to go about it.
India is in its infancy. It is not where most international teams or countries are. So my first reaction was a little bit of shock, like, boy, I didn't know they didn't know how to call a screen or hedge a screen, which is a pretty basic skill.
I think most of the areas is defensively. The girls are pretty good offensively. They just need a little bit more structure. Defensively, just concepts. We call it denying the ball. When shooters are there, getting up so they don't get open shots, boxing out, rebounding, kind of putting it all together.
But the coaches say they don't hope for a miracle performance by the Indians in China next month. They say it will take at least 7 years for India to win recognition in the world basketball circuit. In Chennai with reporter Sudarshan, Cuckoo Alex for NDTV Hindu.
And head coaches Bill Harris and Tamika joined us in our studios and spoke about how India lacks the infrastructure to give a boost to the hoops.
Well, today we have with us the head coaches of the men's and women's team for basketball going ahead to the Asian Games, really. Tamika and Williams Harris, more well known as Bill Harris. Thank you so much for joining us today. So really, what was your first reaction when you were asked to come down here to India and start from scratch to train all the youngsters here?
Well, one, I was surprised. I didn't know that India was moving in that direction, but once I was contacted, pursued it, and now I'm here.
All right. What about you, Tamika? Really, what do you think is the most difficult aspect that you'll have to face here in India?
I think the most difficult one is we come from a country who is very versed. We are very good at the sport of basketball. So here's just bringing the overall, the agility, the conditioning, the offense, the defense, everything that we know, and he knows a lot more than I do, to a team within 2 months before they play in the great game of the Asian Games. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to do, is bring all the knowledge we have and put it into 2 months.
All right, Bill, how long do you think it's really going to take for India and all of our talent, that if you possibly might identify any talent here in India, to really get somewhere at a significant level in the world of basketball?
It's going to take years to do that.
How many years is the question?
Many years, many years. Basketball was invented in the United States. In fact, in the state I grew up in is where the Hall of Fame is. Tamika coached where the inventor coached, James Naismith. I mean, we're hundreds of years old in it and still compete trying to be the best in the world. So it's going to take many years. It's a cultural thing. Coaches need to succeed or they get fired. That's a different culture than we find here in India. The motivation is different. The money is much bigger in the United States.
I have to interrupt you there. And now, speaking of motivation, now the NBA, obviously, all over the world, is looked up to on a whole different level in terms of a sport by itself, individually. Now, all the youngsters watching these matches, really, they have that adrenaline rush. But far more than that, what else do they really need? Tamika, go for this one.
I would have to say just the training, everything I just talked about. Like you said, in America, our kids have a lot of strength training. If you look at an 18-year-old here and an 18-year-old man or woman in India, there's a huge difference of maturity. conditioning, the ability to read the game, to know plays. Players we coach have 20, 30, 40, 50, up to 200 plays a year. Players here, we give them 4 or 5, and they say, "Oh, coach, that's that's a lot of plays." There's just Bill used this analogy, just like somebody from India trying to teach somebody from the U.S. cricket. There will be big significant
difference there.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking about offensive and defensive. Now, what about you, Bill? Really, when everybody knows that when you play an offensive match, offensive game, really, you win the match. But if you play defensive, you possibly will win the championship. So what are the qualities that you might identify in the Indian game of basketball in comparison to the NBA?
Well, one is defense is going to be the same throughout the world. You said it correctly. I mean, to win championships, you've got to be good defensively. The difference here is the players are not nearly as disciplined. They're not nearly as motivated because defense is a lot of work. It's not enjoyable. You don't read about it in the newspapers. You don't talk about it on television usually. But it is something that is just hard work, technique, involves a lot of pain.
Most of them are going back to undergrad. Most of them are still in high school. We have some babies, some 16-year-olds. Some of them are looking forward to, and some of them are teachers and work for the railways and the national team of any other country for the most part. The bigger countries, China, South Korea, Russia, some other places in Europe. We talk about other countries. They play basketball for a living year-round. So that is a difference, and it gives them a bit of an edge over a place like India. And I think with what BFI is doing, the government here, what they're trying to do, if we could put more money into these kids' pockets and when they start to mature and they can play year-round, you'll see a big difference, a big growth.
So there are a whole lot of aspects that really need to go into the game of basketball, or any sport for that matter, really. Now, if you ever had the chance to come back again after this session, really, with our Indian players, would you ever come back and coach?
Well, it depends on the motivation. It really depends. If you follow the money, in the United States, for instance, if you ask that question, it would depend on your contract. And if you were not successful, you'd get fired and lose your contract. But if you are successful, you get a bigger contract. That's the way it is in coaching. It's the same way in playing.
On that note, we will end this discussion. Thank you so much, Bill and Damika, for joining us today. It's been fantastic having you in the studio, and let's hope for a whole lot more growth, really, for the game of basketball here in India. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we could pack into this bulletin tonight. Have a great Sunday ahead. Good night.